Welcome, everyone, listeners, one and all. I'm John McDonald. My magical curse is that I have this really big sweet tooth, and that's likely to put me in a long time sleep coma, especially during the American Thanksgiving. And I'm here with Magnus, whose curse is being too beautiful to live.
Aw, that's always so lovely of you to say, sir. But I know that really my curse is the dreaded lull of procrastination. How often have we striven to create something, and yet it's so easy to get into a YouTube video binge?
Well, we can't all be Henry, whose insistence drives the plot of the entire first season of Once Upon a Time. And that's what we're going to talk about today, Once Upon a Time. This may end up being a two-parter
Hmm.
episode like Sabrina was, just because over the 7 seasons, there was a lot to cover. I was even just reading how many characters they had as main characters over the course of the 7 seasons, and that doesn't count the spin-off, and I was like, this is exhausting.
So what counts as a main character, though?
Okay, so for them, it counts as so like even Riding Hood, who left in the
Hmm.
middle of the first season, counts as a main character for them. Um, yeah,
Okay.
like Hook hadn't even finished all of his season 2 run, and they already like after his first 7 episodes, he was already bumped up to a cast regular. That's how Wikipedia puts it. I don't know what happened in like the room where they decide those things, but as Wikipedia puts it, like Sean Maguire, who played
Robin,
um,
was it?
Robin Hood,
Oh, no,
who I think was
no,
a
no.
great addition to the cast. Yeah, no, he played Robin Hood because
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Hmm.
Robin and Lana Parilla's character, Robin and
Yeah.
Regina's like love story was one of the more successful parts of one of the final seasons. I think
Hmm.
that's my feeling on the matter.
It was such a shame with what happened to their story. Um, I think from what I've read after the fact, um, Rob Sean left because he felt that he was being underutilized, and you can kind of see it in his scenes. He was there, but I wouldn't say he had a lot to do besides being in a supportive role. But I think after the fact, he started to regret leaving so abruptly like that.
And I think we could talk about that. Once Upon a Time
Yep.
is a lot, so my desire is to kind of do it season by season, except for the seasons where there's half a season, which we can also talk about as a structural element because I have the Wikipedia page up so I can keep it like I have the actual Wikipedia page up too, not the Once Upon a Time fandom page where everything is super stylized. You can't find any information at all. I have the actual Wikipedia page so I can actually find things. Yeah.
That's what I was actually going to ask you quickly. So, in terms of, I don't want to derail us too much from the main push. You were saying before about main characters. So, did they count the guest stars that for the half seasons as main characters as well? So, I'm thinking about like Elsa and Anna for the Frozen season. I'm thinking about Arthur and Merlin for the Camelot season. Do they count them as main as
So
well?
they have so Wikipedia does 3 categories here. So they've got a regular, and that includes Snow White, Emma, the Queen, Prince Charming, Belle, Henry.
Yeah, the
Uh,
core
but
cast.
they
Yeah.
have Ruby Red Riding Hood as a regular,
Ah.
when I would not have considered that.
Mm.
And then Mr. Gold and Captain Hook are the 2 other regulars. So the regular category is pretty well thought out. I agree with
Mm.
it. They include Henry, they include younger Henry, Jared L. Skidmore. So older Henry is
Yeah.
not a regular. So recurring characters include Grumpy, Balefire, Cora, who is very underrated as a character. I love Barbara
Mm.
Hershey. All of the
Yeah.
dwarves for so Flynn is considered, Aurora is considered, Tamara, Dr. Frankenstein, the Mad Hatter. Sebastian Stan is a recurring character is weird because he was only on there for like a season, right?
He
Um,
was, yes, in the first as the Mad Hatter.
yeah.
He might have done a cameo at the beginning of the second, I believe.
Well, yeah, so he's considered a recurring, and the guest
Mm.
stars include Mila, older Henry, Jamie Dornan as Sheriff Graham Hubert, who was underutilized as well.
Hmm.
And so even the
That-
dragon is considered a guest. So I guess Tazi Ma, who played, I guess this was the dragon in season 1, because
Mm,
Chernabog doesn't have a character actor, so I guess this is that. Um, yeah, but like, I don't even see Lily on this list, who had one of the more interesting side plots, which is kind of interesting. And when we get to that season, I think it'll be really good to talk about.
mm. Okay.
Lily and Maleficent, I thought was actually one of the more successful things.
Mm,
Yeah, so it's kind of an arbitrary, like, who is a guest star, who's recurring, and who's a cast regular.
that's
So
very, very interesting. The fact, so again, I don't want to derail this too much, but the fact that um, Ruby, Red Riding Hood, was counted as a season regular, but then Sheriff, the sheriff wasn't. Well, was that Sheriff Grantham, was
yeah,
it?
Sheriff Graham
Yeah,
Hubert, which
yeah.
Humbert is like the worst name to saddle a character with for a last name. Like, if you're gonna have Jamie Dornan as a sexy sheriff character and you're going up
Yeah.
against Nick from Grimm, like, you got to give that last name a little sex appeal. Humbert is like,
Hmm.
you're putting extra
Hmm.
consonants in there. It's like a Brennan Lee Mulligan character. But yeah, so like something interesting is that like even the seasons, and Jekyll and Hyde had like a 2-season arc almost. Like Jekyll and Hyde
Hmm.
aren't even on any of these lists, and I think that was the only time we
Hmm.
saw Sam Witwer in Once Upon a Time. And I, maybe it's just because it's the dearth of people, but I don't even see them on this list, and I think they should have been at least recurring. They don't even have Hades on here. It doesn't look like. I don't even
Oh.
see. Yeah, I don't see what's his name as Hades on here, and he was kind of integral to one of the seasons. Yeah,
Hmm.
they've got Wendy Darling on here before they've got Hades. I don't see Hades at all. So maybe this list is nuts. I don't know.
Yeah.
Um,
It sounds a bit nuts.
I,
But that is small potatoes compared to Once itself.
well, and I don't think it's bad to kind of talk about how these characters were ranked by the people that write the articles, because they weren't the people that created the show, but people that watched the
Sure.
show. And um, along with kind of how, especially I think it was season 3 started the precedent of the half season. When you talk
Mm,
about Once Upon a Time, talking about the amount of characters, talking about how the seasons were broken up, talking about the plot lines. The guys that created this, who worked on Lost, decided to take basically a Lost approach to Once Upon a Time. So it's
yeah.
supposed to be about the character more than it is necessarily about the plot. And where Lost was about redemption, and this is on the Wikipedia page, and this is like a full-on quote, where Lost was about redemption, Once Upon a Time is supposed to be about hope. And so talking about the characters, talking about the plots, talking about how that relates to the concept, um, and this is like the Good Place, where Damon Lindelof is a godfather of it, but he had a big hand in the Good Place. He did not have a hand in this show. He was just kind of the, like, gave his blessing to the concept kind of guy. So I don't think it's off page to talk about it. I think it's actually a really important thing to consider when you consider what Once Upon a Time is. What is Once Upon a Time to you? Because for you, I feel there's more excitement. I have some excitement about this. I'm really excited to talk about this, but I feel like
Mm.
for you, and we were like, we're doing Mythic May. And I was like, we're gonna do Once Upon a Time. I felt like that was like really exciting for you. So
Yes. Well, a bit of background, really. This was one of the first proper shows that I started watching with my other half when we got together. He was a very big oncer um, before we met, and he introduced me to the show. And we sat down, we watched the entirety of it together. So I've
how
gone
many?
through all of the seasons, and sorry,
So you
pardon?
had all 7 seasons at that point, or like was he a oncer and it was like season
Uh,
5?
he, I think he'd watched like the first 2 seasons, and he was of the mindset of, I need you to watch this and I want us to watch it together. And we started doing that. So I rapidly caught up and we were watching it together. So we went through all the highs and lows of Once. Um, so I've got a bit of background in it, and um, I've rewatched it a number of times now with the other half. So yeah, I find it a very interesting show because of from multiple different reasons. From just like a straight by itself as a series, and its retelling of really popular stories, but in their own way. Because there's a once has always been really good at doing its own twists on things. Um, some that you can see coming, but other times like you do get a little surprised about where they've taken things as well. Um, and I quite enjoyed once from how indicative it is of our culture with wanting to retell stories. Um, is not retelling fairy tales is not a Disney thing. We do it all the time. The amount of times I've watched different versions of Cinderella and Beauty and the Beast. Oh, it's it's really great. It's really great to see how people just really get into passing on stories, and I think that's something that once really capitalized upon. Um,
And here's something really interesting too, is that when I was looking up different fantasy series to compare to
mm,
Once Upon a Time, most of them are not pure fantasy. So you've got like a procedural fantasy show like Grimm or like Sleepy Hollow, which is a descendant of um, Once Upon a Time, and you've got action adventure ones, which is like the Librarians, and then you've
mm,
got like the not family oriented ones, but you have the kind of emotional conflict ones like Charmed. And
yeah,
so it's very rare in American fantasy television to have a show that's pure fantasy in the way that I think about Once Upon a Time, because it is action and adventure, but at its
mm,
heart it was about hope, as
yeah,
the creators kind of say. And it's one of those things where like so all the shows I was looking at, things like Fringe, things like Eureka, things like Leverage, they were all around or they ended before one started. Really, the
mm,
only thing that was happening at the same time as ones that had anything near the fan base was Grimm. Um, and Grimm never really caught on as much as once did because it wasn't you
no,
were telling really new mythology, and once was really a retelling of very well known mythology.
I agree. Grimm was much more of almost a niche fantasy following. Like if you knew of Grimm and you're a fan of it, then you would go along for the ride with it. And it was probably more of a word of mouth thing. Whereas Once Upon a Time, I believe it was ABC that was showing Once Upon a Time when
Oh
it
yeah,
was originally airing.
that was always
Yeah.
ABC. Yeah.
ABC was marketing, I think, once as very much as a flagship show. So I sent, in a sense, like it had the marketing and publicity behind it. But I also think because it had its blessing from Disney to be using um, character names, etc., it had a bit of a backing from that as well. Whereas shows like Grimm and thinking about like Teen Wolf, etc.,
Well, you think about the
didn't have that
Librarians,
backing.
where it starts out as a movie and then it becomes a TV series.
Mm,
Because I enjoyed the Librarian movies because I've always liked Noah
mm,
Wiley. And then when they did the spinoff and he was still in it, and they brought in Christian Kane after Leverage was either canceled or ended before it came back. I could never keep up with Leverage. But I live around where they filmed Grimm. Like when I was
mm.
doing theater courses, some of the places I went to, the people that did costumes and props for Grimm were coming in to like buy rosaries and hammers and things like that. So there's a concept of Grimm as a very hometown show, whereas Once Upon a Time is really high fantasy and it's really outside. Like the town of in
Yeah.
Maine doesn't exist except for Storybrooke as it was built and as it was shot. And so there's more of like I was going to classes one day and they had shut down part of the library because the librarians was filming there, kind of thing.
Mm,
So really,
yeah.
Once Upon a Time is not just high art in its own high art pop kind of way, fantasy thing, but it's also very aloof from the people that liked it. Like Storybrooke was a secret place you could only get to if you met this criteria. Except in season two, when you had those two evil guys coming in that were trying to destroy all magic for a very brief period of time. And I literally looked at the page for season two and I was like, I don't remember this. like it all. I remember Captain Hook, I remember Aurora, I remember
Mhm.
Mulan, but who are these two people they're talking about that are trying to destroy magic? And it made me just think of like I went into like the heroes and the Sense8 headspace, and I was like, I don't remember that part of season 2 at all.
Well, to be honest, so you mentioned before about once as high fantasy. Um, I actually think if you look at the seasons from season 1 onwards, you actually notice a bit of a transition in theming and atmosphere. So season 1, um, there's fantasy elements and they're doing the flashbacks, which I think, to make a note of it, from here, I think the framing device of including the flashback stories to give extra background for the characters was really well done. It really did. I mean, it did get a bit convoluted and confusing sometimes, trying to figure out where everyone's backstories were in relation at this point in time, etc. Especially the main cast, like Regina, because you were kind of flipping back and forth for her timeline.
Well, and then in
Uh,
like season
uh,
6, she had to parent trap herself because she was playing
yeah.
herself, and also her evil alternate self
Oh, so,
made manifest
yeah.
in Storybrooke. It's just
So,
fabulous.
there, she had variants before there were variants.
It's true.
Um,
She was the
yeah.
first TVA employee before they even bought Marvel, and they didn't know it until it was too late. Also, Lana Parilla is one of my favorite cast members because I saw her after once in Why Women
Mm,
Kill, and if nobody's seen Why Women Kill, Lana Parilla is fabulous in it.
mm.
The whole series is fabulous, but I want to concentrate on Once Upon a Time, not just Lana Parilla. Parilla. I know it's two
Uh,
L's. So I don't know if it's
is
supposed
it
to be a Y or two
Is it
L's.
Prilla? There's definitely not a Y in it. I
No, there's
think the
not a Y,
pronunciation.
but if she's like a Spanish or Mexican origin, the two L's generally are like a Y sound they're supposed to make. And I don't know if it's Parilla
Mhm.
or Parilla, so I'm gonna say Parilla, and I'm probably gonna be wrong.
I'm sure our lovely listeners will correct us on our pronunciation.
All you
Or
oncers, please don't cast a curse on me. I don't think I'd handle the curse very well.
so, um, yeah, flashbacks are great. And on a minor note, I'm sort of surprised that we haven't as yet seen anyone make a sort of YouTube series that taking all of those separate clips and trying to put them into sort of a chronological movie order, as it were. But that's just a
Well,
minor
I
point.
wonder too if that has to do with the age of the people that generally watched once. Because especially in the first season, when it was quote unquote the old Enchanted Forest, because in season 7, when they bring in the new Enchanted Forest to try to grab the Princess and the Frog um,
Mhm.
and the Tangled
Like that
money. So in a
Rapunzel, yeah.
way, because you're doing something that's so hyper specific to the oldest Disney animated feature, the first one from Snow White,
Mhm.
it could be that you haven't seen those compilations not because it can't be done, but because the people that really enjoyed those seasons uh,
Mm.
tended to be older and didn't tend to do like I've seen some fan
Mhm.
stuff for once on YouTube, but it's not as prevalent as say Supernatural, where the
Oh,
median age for the show is just
yeah.
much lower in a lot of ways.
Oh, if we're going to go maybe Disney Pacific, think about Encanto. The amount of fan art and um, well, in just general conversation about Encanto, that's been huge. And it's months on since it was released, and
Yeah.
it's died down a little bit, but it's still going strong. I know what you mean. There's not as much for once. So your point
Yeah.
there is actually quite interest. I think that's quite
Well, yeah,
interesting.
and there's not
And
as much Disney merchandise for once either. Like Lunchbox, that does a lot of stuff, didn't have a lot of once merchandise that I ever remember seeing.
no, I was actually mentioning this to my partner the other night because I was looking to see if they were releasing anything new. Because he's a oncer, I want to get him presents on one of his favorite shows. But they hardly have done any merchandise over the last several years. Even towards the end of the show, they weren't really doing much. And one thing that's really surprised me. Um, so you've got the the 7-season box set, but the 7-season box set is a cover picture of the new Cinderella riding the motorcycle, and that is the cover art from the season 7 box art. So they've just slapped that on like the collected edition of all the seasons, whereas like a popular show would normally have unique box art to represent the sort of like the ultimate collection, but it hasn't had anything like that.
And if you look at the box art, because the Wikipedia page, if you click on the Once Upon a Time on the individual seasons, they give you the box art cover art, and most of it is 2 pictures of Emma, one with her face and one with her back side, her like the back of her body as she's holding on to her sword, and then you get like Hook and Regina and Rumpy and Belle and David, probably never James. And you get a sense of Storybrooke the town. And so to have like the whole complete box set, because even like the Friends complete box set is really it's purple, it's the purple door with the gold frame, it's got the pictures of the cast members. Just to have like it's like the box art for Glee, which is a parallel. It share Once Upon a Time in Glee shares a couple of parallels, including fan art of the 2 female leads. Fan fiction loves Regina and
Emma
loves Regina and Emma, and in the same way that Glee fan fiction loves Rachel and Quinn, 2 on-screen heterosexual women, and then in the fan fiction coming together in a very sapphic way, which I think is a very interesting thing because it's never Regina and Snow White, which you would think would be the thing. But it's always Regina and Emma taking the idea of Henry's 2 moms and turning them into actual, like, sapphic Lilith Fair mom characters.
Yes. I would like to touch upon the homo shipping of the show, because there was a lot of like pairings. In fact, the romantic pairings are probably one of the big elements of that. If I could just return to my point about the season structure from before. So what I was going to say was, although they had the flashbacks were really where you were seeing any mention of magic, etc. Like the first season was very much Regina was attempting to keep the magic bottled up. Like already you were seeing cracks. If you look in the later seasons with some of the things that have been going on, like in Storybrooke during like those quiet years. I think it was 30 years. They were trapped within Storybrooke.
They were trapped for 28 years without aging.
28
and no one thought to ask, why am I not aging in 28 years? Why are my children not aging? Why are we perpetually like? I kind of wonder if they celebrated birthdays and Christmas, or like if they had no concept of them. And the curse never makes it clear when they say they were frozen what that actually exactly means. So
exactly. The thing is, I get the feeling that it's probable that even the children weren't aging, and they just become, in a sense, stuck in a day. It does raise the question: if they're stuck in a day, what do they make of the change of the seasons? Like, I've noticed it's suddenly colder and it's actually starting to snow, but I thought it was sunny outside yesterday. Or
and here's part of the things that season 1 does well is that it distracts you so much with the plot, and it distracts you with the idea of like the clock tower as the focal point of the battle, that you don't really get a chance to start pulling on the curtain of the logic of things. Like it works. Season 1 is probably the most successful for me season of Once Upon a Time, even though it doesn't introduce Hook, even though we don't meet Belle, even though there's no Zelena, there's no Robin. I think season 1 having a smaller cast being such an interesting note, because when you think about the idea of fairy tales being retold, often it's really gritty. You know, your Beauty and the Beast police procedural, your fables. Usually it's done in this way where it's just really sad and there's a lot of drug use, there's a lot of smoking and swearing, and it's trying to make up for what it does. Like if you think about the Todd McFarlane Spawn line of toys that were kink BDSM driven for Wizard of Oz, it's almost like it's taking the original product and all the joy and trying to turn it on its head to say how edgy it is. Once Upon a Time was like, these are literal fairy tale people, and we're going to really lean into the fairy tale of it all, and we're just going to make melodrama out of it. And in a way, it's a very safe show. Season one, you could probably just watch season one on its own and probably have a very satisfying experience. Now, obviously, season two brings in Hook, brings in Belle, really expands the world. But season one as its own season, and I don't usually say this about pilot seasons, but season one as a season is such a good microcosm of what Once Upon a Time can be when it's not like overdoing everything.
I feel that the first season of Once Upon a Time was magical realism. I don't think it was really high fantasy. It was very much grounded within Emma coming to this strange town, but it was still, to her, before she discovered the magic, a town. It was very much grounded in her struggle against Regina, and they were one-upping each other. Yes, Regina started to get desperate and resort to whatever magic she could get her hands on, but it was still very much not so much fantasy. The fantasy was almost walled off. It was kept within the flashbacks and such.
Until the final battle, because
until
that's when we got because that's when we really got the sense of magic.
And yes, exactly. But even then, it wasn't until Rumpel very much pulled the cork out of the bottle and let magic spill back out into Storybrooke that he was able to bring it fully across. And I think that's when we get into season two, we start to see the proper transition. Like you start to get so Rumpel's got his magic. He summons that shadow demon thing to kill Regina. And then Emma is very much pulled into the story, into like the fantasy world. Yeah. So she gets her first proper taste of it. And in a way, her coming back with Snow, she's bringing elements of that back into Storybrooke, but it's already spilling out from the other characters. So you start to see its transition. And it's interesting that the transition into high fantasy from, say, like the midpoint of season two onwards is when they actually start to introduce those half-season story arcs as well. Yeah. Almost like they're going into, so season one and part of season two, where they were taking the characters and writing in a way their own story from that into, we're going to now start going into the actual settings of these fantasy characters, and we're almost either continuing their stories or retelling their stories, but everyone's favorite cast of characters is coming along for the ride.
Yeah, each season or even each half season really is its own vacuum, because the idea in season two is where you start seeing the magic beans and beanstalks, and then by the time you get to I think it's season 5, where you're getting people being imported that are not Disney characters like Frankenstein and Jekyll and Hyde. And then in season 7, you get full on Eloise, who's not a Disney canon character at all. And so I think it's interesting to kind of talk about them as a sort of ladder from season 1, where it's very grounded and there's no magic until the big battle at the end, to season 7, which is offset completely by magic. And it's not just about the magic of a curse that erases memories, but what that curse is actually actively preventing from happening.
You mentioned Frankenstein. He was actually in season 2.
He was in season. See, that's the other thing, is that I just sometimes it's hard to hold it in my head what season it is.
So I agree that was the first example. I think that was the first example of a character we weren't really familiar with, that wasn't an established one or an archetype.
But that was an actor that was established in the fantasy series, because if I remember, Frankenstein was played by one of the guys that played an evil cast member on Heroes. So people were used to seeing him in a kind of fantasy capacity. And I know that Heroes is more of a superhero thing than Once is, but a lot of the cast that were guest stars or semi-recurring all had these fantasy pedigrees in a lot of ways. So I think the easiest way to talk about all of the things about Once Upon a Time, the use of subplots, the use of going back and forth from the Enchanted Forest to Storybrooke, the use of the different characters with how many there are, is really kind of to talk about the show season by season. It's one of the few shows where, even unlike Sabrina, because with Sabrina we kind of hop around and you had a really good, you have a really good handle on things. With Once Upon a Time, it almost feels like each season, even with recurring characters, is its own thing. It doesn't feel like an anthology necessarily. Um,
Mm.
but even in like season 3, where it's really technically 2 half seasons when we talk about it there, I think it's really one of those things where it's better to try to talk about as its own separate entities in order to actually get points across. So let's
Mm.
start with season 1. Not really a pilot season, but the pilot episode garnered the most views the show had in season 1, which was 12.93 million. It never dipped under 8 million, but the finale it came back for 9 and some change. But it started out really strong with a pilot of 12 million viewers and 12 and some change.
Mm. No, when you look at the pilot, it's incredibly strong. It's really well done. You've got a lot of memorable moments from the pilot, from Emma making the little wish on the little birthday cupcake by herself,
No, no, she wishes
Henry
on a
turning up at her door.
star. She wishes on a star too, because there's a star candle on the cupcake. So it's very, very within keeping with Disney's. It's a little heavy-handed, but but I still think about that moment sometimes, taking the idea of When You Wish Upon a Star, the very classic Disney song, and actually like putting a star cupcake. She's all alone in her little apartment in New York where there's no magic in the world, and it's so sad. And then she like, so I think the opening of pilot isn't that. It's actually in the enchanted forest, or it's that, and then we go to the enchanted forest. I can't remember, but it's the iconography of both of those moments of the reveal of the curse that's coming, and also
Mm.
the both of those things are very strong. But I kind of like the cupcake more, just because I'm a sap for that kind of thing. So
Well, apparently, my boyfriend fell in love with the show um, during the opening moment in the Enchanted Forest. It opens up with Snow and Charming's wedding, and then Regina pretty much kicks down the door
she Maleficent's
and
their
says,
wedding. She totally
she
Maleficent's their wedding.
sorry I'm late, and starts basically gliding across
Oh,
the
good.
floor, throws aside the pinions, and she's not even phased when Charming, oh, sorry, Snow pulls out Charming's sword and directs it at her throat. She's like, seriously?
So this is also a
It-
great opener for the series, because this is the first time where you see Lana Parilla's actual magnificent
Mhm.
cleavage. Whoever dressed the evil queen was
Oh,
just like, we're doing full drag experience here. Like, I don't think there's highlighter on
mhm,
her boobs like you'd see when like Peppermint. But like I feel like they
mhm.
really understood how to appeal to the demographic of both the gay and the fantasy and the straight men that dress like boobs.
I was going to say, look, one of the core reasons people love the first season was, and this is just an observation of mine, but I felt that the women in this season were strong, they were fierce, and dare I say, the gays love that. When you look at Once Upon a Time in general, besides Rumpel, I suppose, the men of the season, the men of the series feel very, um, no, I don't want to say second class. How do I describe it? I, s- I suppose the best way to put it is the women never lose the spotlight
Yeah.
in the show.
So what you're thinking of is the idea of, it's not like a reverse Bechdel test, but it's more like the show was built
Mm.
with a female gaze in mind. Uh, they
Yeah.
they they answer criticism about Snow White as a princess who can't hold her own right away by having her
Mm.
pull the
Yes.
sword. The sword could be a phallic symbol. I'm not a sociologist, but I'm just like putting it out there that there's no way someone wasn't like, and she grabs the phallic symbol from her husband in order to defend them. So like it's answering criticisms of the princesses right away. You get your fabulous gay drag queen Maleficent entrance, which is the best part of Sleeping Beauty for a lot of people
Mhm.
too. Um, And we find out later Maleficent is involved with this curse, so it makes sense. But yeah,
Hmm.
no, it's a great opening moment of "I'm sorry, I am late," and they bookend it at the end of the series, but we're not going to talk about that yet. Um, but no,
Yeah.
it's a really great moment. The idea of the celebration broken by fear, and then the idea of Emma's loneliness as Henry kind of bursts in to her life incessantly, and then there's just so much Henry in season one. There's a lot of Henry in season one, and there's not enough cast members to make
Yeah.
up for it yet. I don't know how I don't know how your other half feels about Henry, but I have feelings about how strong they made him in season one, and they're mostly not great. So
No, he did grate on the nerves at times, to put it mildly. Um, but the problem is, you have to ask yourself, as a child, is that realistic that he would act in that way, or is it just the writing? I don't know. It's tricky. At some points, I like Henry. At other points, I don't know. I could lock him in a chest and throw him in the sea,
uh,
basically.
the other supernatural call out. The other issue I have, the only really big issue I have with this is that you're using Disney canon. And the one kind of glaring thing I have for season one is that the first half of the season is the idea of Henry carrying around this book of fairy tales at 10 years old. And it gets addressed by other characters that it's weird that he has this book of fairy tales. But I have such a hard time believing that in this universe where things from Lost exist, that instead of films of Disney characters, there are only these fairy tale stories, and Henry is like the only person, except for the author later, that references this giant tome. Like, I just have such a thing about the fact, like, we're doing Disney movies and Disney stuff, but we're using old school fairy tales to tell the stories. It's for me. I don't think they ever really explain why he holds on to it so much. And I think that makes it hard for me to root for him as a main character
Mm.
trying to set these things in motion. It's never really told to me why. I know why he fears Regina because she's the evil queen, but then why bring what is he expecting Emma to do for him that she like
Yeah.
what is he his expectations don't make any sense to me.
Well, I kind of see where you're going with this. Um, the thing is, with Henry, in regards to Storybook, he read it and somehow he figured out that everyone in the book was the characters within, like, was the people, sorry, living within Storybrooke. That little part is a bit of a stretch, but I think he keeps hold of the book because he believes so much that they are. I mean, they really are, but
They really
he at the time he's the only one that believes it, so that's why he holds on to it.
that is actually one of my favorite
I do see
moments.
what you.
That is one of my favorite
Mm.
moments from the book, by the way, is before they introduce Cruella in season four, they have Pongo in episode two, who is owned by Jiminy Cricket. And it still blows my mind that they did the Jiminy Cricket is a psychiatrist character. Like my mind cannot wrap around how they made these choices. But yeah, no, it's sorry, I got
Mm.
off track, but I just had to be like, shout out to the casting crew for being like, we can't have Pongo talking, but we can put a Dalmatian in like the first three episodes. And that made me very
Mm.
happy. And then we never see Pongo again.
Well, occasionally we do, but he just does. He has no real role
Do
besides
anything
a
because they can't
visual.
talk. They never
No,
make
he can't.
animals talk in the series. And the kind of
But
like
but the one thing about one of the things that Once did really well is by including characters like Pongo, even if they didn't do anything, it still references the fact that Pongo exists within this metaverse. And so logically, that opens the door for Cruella to exist as well. So really, what they're doing is they're laying all these little breadcrumbs and making it basically say, well, it makes sense that later down the line, we could introduce so and so as well.
yeah.
So because who else did they have? Uh they had this.
Well, they have the huntsman. One of the great
Yeah.
subplots of season one both involves King Midas's daughter Abigail, and we
Mm.
find out David is like a scumbag who was dating three. By the end of the series, David like dated three of the princesses at once. We find out because he also dated Cinderella for a short period of time, which I find hilarious for a variety of reasons. But so the subplot with Abigail and with the huntsman, which is Jamie Dornan's character before he's killed off unceremoniously, both works in showing how magic works in the universe because of how they got rid of Catherine, but it also works in as a callback both to the Disney animated film and to the Enchanted Forest set that they're building. The idea of these people actually are these people. No, Henry's not crazy. It's just you have to read the storybook to know. Because that's how Mary Martin figures out she's Snow White, is like her memories are unlocked by the storybook. Um,
Mhm.
which I don't know if I actually like as a concept or not. But for the show, there's only so much you can drag it out
Yeah,
until something has to happen plot wise. So
indeed. Yes. Oh, was there something else about Henry? We're talking about the storybook. You were saying about something else
yeah.
to do with his logic. Oh, what he expects Emma to do. Well, he's just obsessed with the idea that she is a hero and she's going to defeat the villain.
Because it's
I would
never
say it's something about.
clarified. Sorry.
I don't know. He just expected her to come along and fix everything,
Because it's
as
not
you do.
because it's not clarified in the
But
storybook he reads that there's the blood potion under the clock tower, right? Like that's just something they end up
no,
figuring out.
but you have to see it. It's viewing it from a child's logic. He's
Yeah.
so obsessed with her being a hero that he believes that she'll find some way to defeat the villain. I mean, so in are we going towards the end of the series here? Or we got more for to
No,
discuss about
I've got
season one?
more. I've got the first time we
Yeah.
see Regina's mansion and the inside of it, where it's all black with
Oh,
white thorns and the giant bowl of apples on her desk. Like, if it's not
oh.
enough that she's the evil queen, now you know. It's
Oh well.
it's both the
Since you've
best
mentioned,
and the worst iconography at the same time. It's best and worst at the same time. I don't even know how to explain it.
I think you've got to really go into the camp aspect of Once Upon a Time. Sometimes you have to kind of let yourself go and just enjoy it for the ride it is. And yes, you could see it as like corny references, but you can also see it as being totally in character by referencing elements of their personality, um, who they are. Um, I was going to say that one thing that Once does really well is the little subtle references everywhere. If you look at Rumpel's pawn shop, for example, it's a
You
treasure
should
trove of bits.
say pawn again because that sounded very close to another word.
Pawn,
Pawn, yes. His
pawn.
Rumpel's pawn shop, not Rumpel's porn shop, because it definitely sounded like porn when he said that. I'm like, that's a different movie, sweetie.
Well, I've heard a couple of people reference Rumpel's dungeons apparently
Oh my
in the fan fiction. So, but let's move swiftly on from there.
god.
Yeah.
uh,
Mm.
yeah, the conversation where the actually in season one of the reveals, I think the best reveal is for the first three episodes, Regina has been denying that she's the evil queen for a long time. And then she and Rumple have the conversation in the orchard where Rumple reveals that he still remembers who he is and he knows who she is, and she's just like, "What?" And the whole facade just drops, and it's
Mm.
really great because they're having this conversation in this fictitious version of a forest, and almost like she's trying to recreate an enchanted forest to get her happy ending, but she
Yeah.
can't fully commit to it, so it's a suburbanized version. It's
Mm.
sanitized. It's not real. And
Yeah.
that conversation, I think, was probably where season one grabbed me.
Mm. Yeah, I totally see what you're saying. I totally see what you're meaning there. So I'm just having a think because I really enjoyed later on the season where she forces him to fully admit he's Rumpel because she's managed to back him into a corner when he's in hospital and everything. and he has no choice but to admit it. But you can really feel the fierce rivalry between them at that point. Um,
Yeah.
and I think that's another highlight of their contest. Um, oh, I can't remember. There was another point I was going to make, but I'll have to leave it for now since I can't remember it.
I also love his name. Much as I have issues with Rempel as a character, being both a ladies' man and also very femme in this weird Pee Wee Herman sort of way. The calling Rumpelstiltskin Mr. Gold is genius because it doesn't just call to his wealth, but it calls to more traditional non-Disney versions of Rumpel.
Mm,
It calls to his idea of spinning straw into gold, spinning tails. He has this really great, almost spider-like thing happening in season one,
mm.
whereas Regina
Yes.
is working to do things. He's like slowly ensnaring everyone. He's keeping Emma around, mostly to stick in her burr, but also to get magic back. Um, Robert Carlyle is great in other things. I think Rumpel's the first casting choice where this was a character I could have seen like a lot less of. And then we get to the Catherine Huntsman stuff. So I see less of him in that, and I'm mollified. Nothing against Robert Carlyle. I like him as an actor, but like Rumpel is the first casting for me where it's like Henry I can understand, but except for Mr. Gold being rich, he wasn't doing much in season one except for being an antagonist to Regina, and we already had Emma and Henry for that. So
Well, the thing is, with Rumpel in season one, he was as trapped as the rest of them. Yes, he had his memories, which was a potent tool in his arsenal. But he very much was, he was, there was not much he could do. Um, I love the fact that he started actually packing straight away when he could in season two, preparing to get out into the world to find his son. He still had the good old obsession there. But yeah, he just had to wait with everyone else in season one. So I kind of understand your point, but I think what the writers were aiming to do is they had an idea where they wanted to take once into future seasons. So they were laying like a few important chess pieces
yeah,
here and there, building it up in preparation. Because I think they were always intending for Rumpel to become take center stage as a central bad in at least one of the seasons, which he did. We have to ask ourselves at some point about how the writing changed due to the expectations that started to be put on once from the studio, because I do get the sense that they had a vision, but I think they started to change it in line with requests from the studio for different things. For example, I don't think they ever had a Frozen storyline, but then all of a sudden Frozen came out and
yeah.
became the popular thing. That's something we can discuss though when we reach the Frozen.
Well,
Um,
something to think about too in this first season is you had the two original creators in the writing room.
yeah,
And so they had a very clear vision of what they wanted. They'd known what they wanted since Lost, actually. So they had
yeah,
been planning this since they had worked on Lost. Um, I think for me, because you start to see it in season three, this is where you get new writers, at least one of the showrunners, I think had left if I understand the timeline. So it also has to do with bringing in new writing blood, how secure they are in the show, who they're going to bring in. Um, and I think for me, season one works because spiritually it's so much of what the showrunners wanted to do. And because
yes.
I can dip into the Brooklyn Nine of it all. So like having a cop who's a good character, who's just misguided, and even though David doesn't have a lot of lines in season one, he's a very useful character. So by the time he's revealed as Emma's dad for real,
Mm,
and they have their reunion, I feel really good about David and Mary Margaret in this season. I really like the idea of Regina essentially framing her for murder, which is also a callback to trying to get rid of
Oh,
her in the fairy tale. I really think the
yeah,
subplot works, and there's a lot of criticism about season one because David is not an active character in it, but it wasn't his. Because in the opening, when she grabs his sword, that tells you how active he's going to be in things. Like he's not a
yeah.
submissive character, but also it's not his story yet, and it's not for a while. And I think that's actually okay. Also, I just enjoy seeing him in Jamie Dornan and sheriff's outfits. Like, I'm gonna be completely honest, like the
Oh,
way they dress up the male cast, I'm not mad. So
not in the slightest. Oh, David's leather jacket, and then you got to discuss his attire in his
yeah,
Prince Charming persona. Oh, he was perfectly cast as Prince
yeah,
Charming
he
because
really was.
he was masculine, but he wasn't threatening in the slightest. He was strong and good-willed, but in a very sort of supportive, kind sort of way. It was funny to see him playing his evil twin brother and being the absolute
James.
worst jerk in
James. No,
comparison,
no, he's
which was
evil because he has eyeliner. That's how you know James is
oh,
evil because he has eyeliner.
Iron
That's how you know the evil is a thing.
It- oh, that's such a campy panto thing, like for an actor to be playing the two separate roles, sort of like opposed to one another. I quite enjoyed it. I know that James was underutilized, but as a foil to Charming, and really as sort of shadow self, you could almost argue. I think it worked well. In terms of like Charming, like as a supportive main cast member, I agree, and I think the reason for that was like season one was the story of Regina and her struggle against Emma, sort of like the newcomer into her territory and their fierce battles against each other. Um, and pretty much as Jimmy T. Cricket said, you know, they were basically tearing each other apart. So something was going to have to give.
Which
You
is
could
the
see how
launch of a
desperate
thousand
Regina
fan
was getting.
fiction ships. They're tearing each other apart. It's like
Exactly.
Rachel and Clint on Glee.
It was yeah, like shipping, and it also, you know, it caught people's attention to see this like fierce struggle between these two really strong women. And I think that is what people really liked about Once and still do love about Once, that it gave women its due, very much so. And it didn't feel at the expense of men because the story wasn't about male heroes and male villains. It was sometimes, but it was the focus never wavered from Regina and Emma's
Yeah.
contention, their contentious like story against each other, and how actually that naturally evolved was something else that was really great to see.
And what's nice too is that when
Um,
we talk about season one, you really don't
mm,
know the shadow characters are coming. In fact, in America, when you say something like a shadow self, generally you have to define it for people. But Once Upon a Time is one of those few shows where when you say shadow self, you can literally point to physical manifestations of that, like Regina's black heart, like the heart thing that comes along much later in the series.
mm.
Once Upon a Time is also one of the few TV shows that ran for a long time that didn't break up a marriage because Jennifer Goodwin and charming Josh Dallas were married in real life, and I don't know if that's because of this show or if they were married and they were both cast
Um,
because they were married.
no, no. I know the background to this. I believe Jennifer was married to someone else. Um, I believe Josh was as well, but by the sounds of it, their marriages were both coming to an end when they were both cast in Once. And then they quickly actually formed more than just a working partnership with each other. They got to, I think it was like during season two that off the set they got together, and then they got married maybe around season four or something, because this leads naturally into, was it, oh what, oh no, actually I think it was season ooh, sorry, I'm trying to remember now. When was the Wicked Witch in?
Wicked Witch comes in because they were doing the backdoor. Part of that season with the Wicked Witch is they were also doing the backdoor pilot to Once Upon a Wonderland. So that's after we get Cruella and Maleficent. So it's got to be closer to season 5.
I
Because they
see.
went to Neverland in 3, and that was kind of the first time they traveled to a new land that wasn't the Enchanted Forest. So it has to be in the middle of the series at the earliest. And I think season 5, it's maybe not season 5 because I think season 5 is also the Arthurian and Merlin stuff. But it's this is where we go season by season. Because if we try to do it as like a long timeline, it really starts to crack under the stress of its own subplottage.
Yes, it does indeed. Um, and the reason I mention it, um, because so it was either her, her pregnancy during the Wicked Witch line, or later on, in like the last season. Um, one of them was real. Like Jennifer Goodwin was actually pregnant during one of them, so they included that part into um, the writing. Um,
Which
da,
I
da,
think is
da.
nice. I actually
Yes,
respect because David in season 2, when we get to season 2, David starts to teach Henry to like sword fight or something while Emma is
yeah,
gone, and Emma comes back and is like, "What are you doing with my child? Teaching him to sword fight? Why are you doing this crazy thing with this 11-year-old?"
yes. Da, da, da. Yes. So it was the Wicked Witch story arc. Jennifer was actually pregnant in real life. That's why they included that as part of that one.
And though
But sorry, that's
yeah,
going to the different season.
and though I don't like the person they cast, like the feeling I have for Belle and the Blue Fairy is the same way I feel about the casting of Zelena, but the
Mm,
characters, some of their subplots work, and the idea of Mary Martin being pregnant when Zelena comes and Zelena's yearning for a family,
mm,
Zelena's yearning for a not broken home, and the charming fear about having a child that they don't have to put in a magic enchanted wardrobe. I think all that ties together a lot of what we see in season 1 even nicely.
mm,
The idea you
mm.
even get glimpses of Regina's good self in how she wants Henry to really see her as a mother, like because that wasn't something you got in the Disney cartoon. The evil stepmom is just like a drag queen evil stepmom. It's very Ursula in that way. But what
Yeah.
Lana Parilla does with Regina is show that yes, she wants power, but it's not just power for power's sake. She's not Chernabog. She's not just doing it so she can be the most evil. She's doing it for a happy ending. And this was before they had hammered it home for the 7th millionth time in the show. So it's still in season 1, it's still like a very fresh concept of the search for a happy ending. And the
Mm,
question, the philosophical question of does an evil queen doing all this, but her goal is her own happy ending? Yes, it's selfish, but
yeah.
except for like I can't remember who murders the huntsman, who murders Jamie Dornan's character, but like
Oh, it's Regina. She sees him getting close to Emma, and she has a fit of jealousy. So he takes out takes out his heart from her vault, and she crushes it.
yeah, so it's not like I mean it's not great. It doesn't really make my point stronger, but it's also jealousy is a very real and a very strong emotion that can overtake you. So
Mm,
like we see her in this struggle throughout the series with her heart and with doing the right thing. But
yes.
Lana Parilla humanizes the Evil Queen in a way that I was completely taken off guard by. And I think that's great. That was one
Mm,
of the best things. Also, Mary Martin's cute little short Peter Pan haircut for Snow White. Oh, it's so adorable. Like just
mm.
fantastic and
But
fabulous. Everything I want.
in terms of names, Mary Margaret, what a great name as well, because it instantly brings up an allusion to the Virgin Mary. which is commonly given the personification of innocence and grace and such. So instantly, it's such a great name for a character that's in her Storybrooke persona, she's a lot more less fighty. I mean, after she gets back her memories, I think she starts that elements of her fantasy, sorry, her enchanted forest persona do come out across a bit more, but she's still seen as more of the supportive motherly figure of the cast.
She's also happy. Once Upon a Time could have totally gone in a direction where all of the characters in their Storybrooke personas were these miserable, craven things desperately holding out for hero, a la Shrek 2. But there's actually some back and forth because when she remembers she's Snow White, she struggles with what that means because she has a life as this kind of teacher character.
Mm,
Like it's a really interesting take on the idea of when you're given that persona. You know, she kind of falls in love with herself, and it's almost like when she finds out she's Snow White, she's happy to remember who she is, but she also has to make some
mm.
choices. The will they won't they with Prince Charming, who she then recognizes, who
Oh,
then kind of falls off there. Like the whole middle of season one of them trying so desperately not to have this storybook romance happen again because it's
yeah.
the wrong thing to do, not because they're not in love or they're not falling, but because we have responsibilities and we have these duties to our lives. Like it's a
Mm.
real thing and it's real good.
Yes. And I have to admit, at first, when I first watched it, and that their back and forth thing, and the fact that the curse kept interfering to try and prevent them getting together, was really starting to annoy me because it was just like, oh, not again. But actually, rewatching it, I do see why that was, and it really does come across as they're caught in this struggle they're not aware of, um, and they seem to personify it as like their, what, why they shouldn't, because it's their duty for themselves, without even realizing that there's like this unseen element interfering as well. So actually, I on second viewing, I liked it a lot more. um
There's
just
also so
to quickly
the
touch on something.
no,
Yeah,
yeah,
sorry,
go
go
for
on.
it. Oh, I was gonna say there's also when I talk about chilling adventures of Sabrina, I talk about
Yeah.
how there's that trial, and in the trial where we're supposed to have all these great reveals that are supposed to just knock the audience on its behind.
Mm,
It doesn't hit for me dramatically and emotionally because of the pacing of the series. Whereas the trial here, the influence of Mr. Gold, the discovery of what's happened actually with Catherine and how it relates to the magic. It's so good.
mm,
It's just hard to explain to people because I watched this on Netflix after season three had ended. So I come into it at the end of season three, so I have all this stuff to binge. Like I can only imagine for people watching it live, um, probably at about 10 million, which is not a small number, by the way. I can only imagine how dramatic that kind of courtroom drama was in the middle of the season, and how much it's about how characters that we perceive as good do right. And I think it was really one of the successes of season one of Once was the idea of did Snow White actually kill someone? Because they really don't make it clear for the audience until like we find out what happened when everybody else finds out. And I think it's a really strong thing of maybe Snow isn't quite as Snow White as we were led to believe
mm.
previously. And I think that's really, yeah, I think my only one big distraction of season one, besides Henry whining, which eventually tempers when they have more plot, but like
Yeah.
besides my thing with Rumple, which gets worse as the series goes on, and then when we find out he's also like the son of Peter Pan and sees like, but with everything of surrounding Rumple, like Rumple is one of my minor complaints with the series, but it's a very minor complaint. I don't think Robert Carlyle is bad at his job by any means, and he has some great moments. But for me, season one is really all about um, Mary, Martin, and Charming coming together. And it's also about Emma discovering childhood, because one thing that season one has that we don't talk about as much because you get distracted by other things is the idea about rediscovering childhood, rediscovering hope, because Emma doesn't have hope in the beginning. Her 28th birthday with her sad star candle cupcake, and then Henry knocks her. Like, she doesn't have anything at the
No.
beginning of the series. And the series is her finding all these things that we consider like childhood
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
And
Finding
so,
some.
yeah, you don't want to let that go, because that's a big part of the message of hope is it
Yeah.
was everything she was looking for, she didn't know she wanted.
I think another thing of this season, which only in hindsight, when you watch later seasons, that you fully come to appreciate this, was the fact is Regina needed to fail in this season. She needed to be defeated because, as you see in later seasons, she was dissatisfied with the happy ending she'd received because of the curse. And she was trying to fill that void in her life and in her heart by having a child, Henry. But even so, Henry didn't return her love because Regina was not in the right mental place. That she, in a way, Regina was still trapped within her revenge. And it was only by being defeated and then being able to, in a sense, start to move on again that she actually started to discover what it is that she was really missing in her life.
And one of those breadcrumbs comes in the form of Pinocchio, whose big reveal in season one and is turning back into a wooden puppet is about fear, which is the same kind of fear that Regina faces in losing her fairy and not meeting Robin in that tavern much later in that series. And so the
Mhm.
idea of hope and the idea of the antithesis of hope being the fear, not the absence of hope, but the fear of doing something, is kind of the other part of this series, because that is what motorizes Regina's whole
Mhm.
story, really, and it's so
You,
good and it's so right.
you could say that Regina's whole story, um, just as my final word, her whole story is her redemption arc.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and we're going to talk more about that because we have seasons 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then season 7 to all talk about.
Woo!
Um, yes, it's going to be very exciting. So join us for however many episodes this takes.
Uh,
And what are your favorite Once Upon a Time season one moments? Or if you haven't watched the show, what did you think of season one when you heard about it? And we can't wait to hear from you. We can't wait to see you next time. And we hope that you have the most magical of days. Have a great night, everybody. Au revoir, I guess we'll say.
Farewell.